"Hey everyone, I need to share what happened to my family the day after Thanksgiving." We came home, bellies full of Granny's feast, ready to start the Christmas decorations. Little did we know our world was about to be turned upside down. I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic, thinking about how we'd transform our home into a winter wonderland. The attic door swung open, and there he was, a stranger, sprawled on a raggedy mattress like he'd claimed the place. Thin as a scarecrow, he looked up at me with eyes that held a hint of madness. "Lost," he mumbled, his voice scratchy and distant. "I'm lost." I took a step back, the Thanksgiving leftovers in my stomach churning. The stranger tried to get up, his movements erratic and uncoordinated. The stench hit me, a mix of garbage, urine, and desperation. I asked how he got in, and he pointed to the window. That same window we always forgot to lock. Outside was a ladder leading up to the window. "I was lost, you see," he repeated, his eyes scanning the attic as if he'd found a haven. This place looked welcoming. I didn't buy it. Something about the way he stared at our family photo-framed pictures around the attic, fingers twitching like he wanted to grab onto something, sent shivers down my spine. I asked him again, "How'd you really get in here?" His gaze met mine, and for a moment I swear I saw a flicker of malevolence. "Just wanted a place to rest, mister. No harm." I backed out of the attic, closing the door behind me. Downstairs, I told my wife, and we called the cops, our hearts pounding in our chests. While we waited, the air in the house felt thick with unease, like the walls were watching us. We kept hearing creaks from the attic. We were worried about what he was doing up there and what he planned to do next. When the police arrived, they headed up to the attic. We waited in silence, dread settling in. It felt like an eternity before they came down, their faces pale. "He's gone," they said, their voices somber. "Vanished into thin air." We spent that night at Granny's too scared to go back home. The next day we returned, hoping it was all a bad dream. But the attic door was wide open, a foul stench lingering in the air. The stranger had left his mark, a feeling that he could slither back into our lives at any moment. Days turned into sleepless nights. Every creak in the floor, every rustle in the wind felt like his presence lingering. We couldn't shake the paranoia, the fear that he was watching, waiting for the right moment to return and do who knows what. And then one cold winter night, the nightmare escalated. We heard a commotion outside, the distant wail of sirens. My heart raced as I peered through the window. The police had cornered someone, a figure in tattered clothes darting through the shadows. They caught him breaking into a neighbor's house, muttering the same excuse, "Lost." The cops finally had him, but the stranger's eyes held a sinister gleam, like he enjoyed playing this twisted game. Turns out we weren't the only ones haunted by his presence. The police hauled him away and we breathed a sigh of relief. But as they drove off, I caught a glimpse of those cold eyes staring back at me, a wicked grin twisting his lips. The nightmare may have ended for us. So Reddit, take this as a warning. Keep your doors locked. Be vigilant, because there are lost souls out there who find joy in creeping into the lives of others. Be safe, and may your holidays be free of unwelcome guests. I never really paid much attention to my neighbors. You know how it is, you live your life, they live theirs, and you exchange the occasional nod or wave. But that day after Thanksgiving, everything changed. I was doing the dishes in my kitchen, just minding my own business, when I happened to glance out the window. That's when I saw it. My neighbor's house. Something off about it. Like shadows moving around inside. At first, I thought maybe they had family over, having leftovers from the Thanksgiving feast. But the more I squinted, the more it didn't make sense. It was dark in there, very dark, and it wasn't even evening yet. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked over to the window, trying to get a better look. The shadows were all over the place, flickering like candle flames. I couldn't see any faces, just these dark figures moving around. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, lived alone, so I couldn't figure out who these people were. Then I heard something. A muffled scream, like someone trying to cry out for help but being gagged or something. My heart started pounding in my chest. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just seeing things, but when I looked again, the shadows were still there, and the muffled screams continued. I'm not the bravest person in the world, but I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, trying to sound as calm as possible. I told the dispatcher about the shadows, the screams, and how something just didn't feel right. They said they'd send someone over to check it out, but it might take a while. I couldn't just sit there, so I went outside, trying to see if there was anything else strange going on. The air felt heavy, like something was weighing it down. I stood there, feeling this sense of dread, like there was something evil inside her house. A couple of other neighbors had come out too, drawn by the weirdness of it all. We huddled together, whispering about what might be happening in Mrs. Johnson's house. Nobody wanted to go over there and check, though. We were all too scared. As we stood there, the shadows in Mrs. Johnson's house seemed to grow darker, more sinister. It was like they were aware of us watching and they didn't like it. I kept glancing at the clock, wondering when the police would finally show up. Minutes felt like hours, and just when I was about to lose hope, I saw the flashing lights of a police car turning onto our street. I've never been so relieved in my life. 2 officers got out, and we all rushed over to them, pointing towards Mrs. Johnson's house, trying to explain what we'd seen and heard. The cops didn't waste any time. They radioed for backup and approached the house with caution. The rest of us were told to stay back, but we couldn't tear our eyes away. The shadows were still moving, but now it felt like they were trapped, cornered. The officers kicked open the front door, and for a moment everything went silent. Then the screams got louder, more desperate. I felt a chill down my spine, and I heard someone in the crowd mutter, "What the hell is going on in there?" Suddenly, the front door burst open and the officers dragged a man out. He was struggling, yelling, and they had to wrestle him to the ground. That's when I noticed the blood on his hands, on his clothes. It looked like something out of a horror movie. More police arrived, and they went into the house to make sure everything was safe. We later found out that Mrs. Johnson had been attacked, tied up, and beaten by this guy, some random stranger who had broken in. He'd been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I couldn't believe it. The quiet neighbor who was kind to everyone and always smiled at us had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. If it hadn't been for the strange shadows and the muffled screams, who knows what would have happened? The police took the guy away in handcuffs, and Mrs. Johnson was taken to the hospital. We all stood there, still processing what had just unfolded. It was like a nightmare that we'd all been a part of, and the relief was palpable. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows haunted my dreams, but I kept telling myself that the police had come just in time. It made me realize how fragile our sense of safety is, how things can go from normal to terrifying in an instant. I never thought much about my neighbors before, but now I couldn't help but be grateful for the community that had come together on that strange, eerie day after Thanksgiving. I got to share this messed up thing that happened to me the day after Thanksgiving. I was just chilling in a post-turkey coma, watching some TV when my phone buzzed. It was just an ordinary Friday night, or so I thought. As I reached for my phone, I noticed the time, 8:30 p.m. I didn't recognize the number flashing on the screen, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was a relative that I forgot to save their number. I answered, and that's when things went from normal evening to, what the heck is happening? The voice on the other end was like something out of a bad horror movie. It was all distorted, like they were talking through a potato or something. I strained to understand what they were saying. It was gruff and creepy as heck. They spoke slowly, each word hanging in the air like a bad smell. 8:30, the voice said, and then it just stopped. No goodbye, no explanation, just dead air. I sat there staring at my phone like it had grown tentacles. What the heck did that even mean? I checked the clock again, and yup, it was still 8:30 p.m. I shook it off, thinking maybe it was just a wrong number or some prank. But here's the thing. The calls kept coming, every half hour on the dot. Always the same distorted voice, always some weird statement or random phrase. Clock ticks, shadow walks, midnight whispers. It was like a messed up poetry slam, and I was the unwilling audience. I tried to ignore it at first. What else do you do when your Friday night turns into a Twilight Zone episode? I muted my phone, but the calls kept coming, like the universe was playing a sick joke on me. I even considered throwing the dang thing out the window, but then curiosity whispered in my ear, louder than the creepy voice on the other end. So I decided to play detective. I started Googling the phrases, thinking maybe it was some viral marketing thing or a secret society initiation. Turns out, nada. Zilch. It was like the words didn't even exist before those phone calls invaded my life. As the night wore on, the suspense ratcheted up. Each call had me on edge, waiting for the next bizarre proclamation. I felt like I was in a low-budget horror movie where the protagonist makes increasingly questionable decisions. Then came the weirdest part. The voice started mentioning stuff that hit too close to home. It said my address, my dog's name, the color of my front door. It was like someone had been stalking me, gathering all these details to mess with my head. My heart raced as I paced around my living room. How the heck did they know all this stuff? Was it a prank? A sick joke by someone who had it out for me? I double-checked all my doors and windows, half expecting some masked villain to burst in and yell, "Gotcha!" But nothing happened. The calls just kept coming, the voice growing more sinister with each passing hour. I felt like a character in a messed-up mystery novel, and the author had a sick sense of humor. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I answered the call, my voice shaky, demanding answers. "Who are you? What do you want?" I practically screamed into the phone. And you know what? The voice chuckled. Like a full-on creepy maniacal laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Then it said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not alone." Click. The call ended, leaving me in the eerie silence of my darkened living room. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I flicked on every light, checked every corner, but there was nothing. No masked intruder, no ghostly figure, just the echoes of a disturbing phone call. The calls eventually stopped just as mysteriously as they began. It was 3 a.m., and I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I sank into my couch, surrounded by the remnants of a nightmarish evening. The next day, I tried to make sense of it all, but there were no answers. I never figured out who was on the other end of those calls or why they targeted me. I changed my number, beefed up my home security, but the unease lingered. Thanksgiving was over, but the hangover of that bizarre night stayed with me. So yeah, that's my messed up story. If anyone has a logical explanation, hit me up. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. And if you get a call from a number you don't recognize, do yourself a favor and don't answer. It's a rabbit hole you might not want to go down. Stay safe out there, everyone.